The patrol was supposed to be boring. That was the word Owen Dale used when he filed the pre-shift report. Routine sweep along the Kepler's Reach border. No anomalies expected. No traffic flagged. Just the ardent and 4 hours of empty space and the low hum of consoles doing their jobs while the crew did theirs. Owen was 24 years old and had been in deep space for 8 months and had not yet learned that boring was a word that attracted attention from the universe. Kara Novak was at her signal station when it came in. She almost missed it. The frequency it arrived on was not one the Ardent systems were actively scanning. It sat 2 bands below standard Dominion broadcast range, tucked in a quiet corner of the spectrum where nothing official was supposed to live. Her board flagged it with a small amber light, the kind of light that usually meant interference or equipment drift, the kind of light that operators dismiss 17 times a day without a second thought. She did not dismiss it. She pulled it up, ran it through the translation engine, and read the output once. Then she read it again. Then a third time, because she was thorough, and also because some part of her brain was insisting that she must have made an error somewhere. She had not made an error. She walked the printout down to Commander Lena Graves herself, rather than sending it through the ship's internal system. She did this without fully deciding to. Her legs just took her there. Graves was at the main tactical console, reviewing the day's sweep data with the focused, unhurried attention she gave to everything. She was a compact woman, not tall, with short dark hair going gray at the temples and eyes the color of overcast sky. She had a way of occupying space that made other people feel like they were the ones standing in the wrong spot. Kara handed her the printout and said nothing. Graves read it. Set it on the console. Looked out at the viewport and the dark beyond it. The dark did not offer anything useful, but she looked at it anyway for a few seconds. "Get me Calloway," she said. Kara went back to her station and opened the long-range comm channel to Earth. Owen Dale, who had heard none of this, looked up from his own console because he had learned to read the temperature of a room, and the temperature of this one had just dropped about 15 degrees. "Commander," he said. Graves picked up the printout and held it out without looking at him. He took it. "Read it. Read it again," because he was young but not slow. The Venkara Dominion had been in control of the known galaxy for 600 years. They had absorbed 412 civilizations in that time. Some of those civilizations had been old, and proud, and powerful, and it had made no difference at all. The Dominion did not fight wars so much as it conducted administrative procedures that involved a lot of fire. The communique was not addressed to Terran High Command. It was not addressed to the Terran fleet. It was addressed, in formal Venkara script, to what translated as the new creatures of the Third Galactic Arm, which was not an insult, technically. It was simply accurate, in the way that calling a child small is accurate without being kind. The message informed humanity, not proposed, not suggested, informed, that Kepler's Reach and the 14 inhabited systems within the Terran frontier zone would be absorbed into the Dominion within 30 standard days. Humanity was invited to choose the manner of its incorporation. They could come willingly, as junior members of the Dominion structure, with certain cultural preservations guaranteed for a period of no less than 2 centuries. They could resist, in which case the outcome would be the same but the cultural preservation clause would not apply. That was it. Those were the options. Refusal was not listed as an option because it had not occurred to Suveth, the Dominion fleet lord who authored the communique, to include it. In 600 years, no species had ever simply said no and meant it. The concept lived in theory, not in practice. Owen set the printout back on the console very carefully, the way a person sets down a glass they are afraid of breaking. "What does this mean for the people in those 14 systems?" he asked. "It means they have 30 days, Graves said. "And us." She looked at him then, and her face was the same as always, level, unreadable, the expression of a woman who had done the math before Owen finished asking the question. "We have one option," she said. He waited. She did not tell him what it was. The channel to Earth opened and Admiral Drew Calloway's voice came through, rougher than usual, which meant he had already been awake for a long time, which meant someone else had intercepted the communique before Kara did. He asked Graves for a read. She gave it to him in 4 sentences, clean and direct, no extra words. He listened without interrupting. When she was done, there was a pause of about 3 seconds. "Hold your position," he said. "Don't respond to the communique. Not yet. Understood. How's your crew? Graves looked at Owen, who was staring at the viewport with his jaw set and his hands flat on his console like he needed something solid under them. She looked at Kara, who had already pulled up the Dominion's fleet movement data and was building a tracking overlay with the focused, slightly ferocious efficiency she used when she was keeping herself from being scared. They're fine, Graves said. Calloway made a sound that was not quite agreement and not quite doubt and was very much the sound of a man who had spent 30 years watching young people carry weight they hadn't expected. The channel closed. The Ardent held its position at the edge of Kepler's reach, running its patrol route, its sensors watching the space ahead. Nothing had moved yet. The Dominion fleet was still out past the standard boundary, sitting where it had been sitting for the last 6 hours, doing nothing that looked like preparation and everything that felt like it. Kara pulled up the communique again on her screen. She had translated hundreds of Dominion communications. Most of them were logistics. Supply orders, territorial updates, species classification reports. This was the first time she had translated one that was about her. She read the phrase again. The new creatures of the Third Galactic Arm. She thought about the 14 systems. About the colonies on the outer edges of the frontier zone. About the people who had gone out there to build something, the way humans always went somewhere to build something, because that was apparently the only thing they knew how to do with an empty space. Do you think they know? Owen asked. He was still looking at the viewport. The people out there. Do you think they know it's coming? They know, Kara said. The broadcast wasn't targeted. Anyone with a receiver could have picked it up. Owen nodded slowly. Outside, the stars held still, the way stars do. They had no opinions about any of this. They had been there before the Dominion and they would be there long after whatever happened next, and they burned with the same clean indifference they had always burned with. The Ardent held the line. Graves stood at the viewport for a long time after the channel closed, her hands behind her back, looking at the dark the way she used to look at hard terrain before a crossing, not afraid of it, not in love with it, just reading it. The option she hadn't named sat in the room with all of them, taking up space, waiting. Admiral Drew Calloway drew the line with one finger. He pulled up the star map on the main display in the command center, leaned over the table, and dragged his finger across the edge of Kepler's reach. Slow. Deliberate. Like a man drawing a line in dirt before a flood and deciding he means it. Nothing crosses this, he said. He did not raise his voice. He was 60 years old and walked with a slight limp from a land operation on Ganymede 20 years ago, and he had long since stopped needing volume to be heard. The room went quiet anyway, the way rooms go quiet when a door closes and you realize it locked. There were 11 admirals in that room. They had been arguing for 2 hours. Admiral Pete Gorman had made the strongest case for negotiation. He was a careful man, good at numbers, and his numbers said that the Dominion's fleet capacity outpaced humanity's by a factor of 8. He had charts. He had projections. He had a calm, reasonable voice and a calm, reasonable plan for seeding the 3 outermost systems to buy time. Calloway had listened to all of it. He was good at listening. He had listened to the negotiation argument and the retreat argument and the appeasement argument, and he had let each one finish, and he had not interrupted anyone, and now he had drawn his line on the map and said his 4 words. Gorman looked at the line. Drew, with respect, the math doesn't support this position. The math never supports this position, Calloway said. That's not what the position is based on. Then what is it based on? Calloway straightened up and looked at the map. Kepler's reach was a small system by galactic standards, one modest star, a handful of habitable worlds, the kind of place that showed up in the middle of a map and not at any edge. Not strategic, not rich, not particularly beautiful. Just theirs. If we give them the outer systems, he said, we teach them where to stop. They'll stop exactly where we stop pushing back. Every time. He looked at Gorman. We stop pushing back now, and in 10 years we're having the same conversation about Earth's orbit. The room was quiet. Calloway sat down. He asked for coffee and someone put a mug in front of him, the ceramic one with the chip in the handle that his aide kept meaning to replace and never did. He wrapped both hands around it and thought about the men and women on the outer colonies, and about Graves on the Ardent holding position at the edge of Kepler's reach with 1 ship and 4 hours of dark. Draft the response, he said. Admiral Nora Huang, who had not spoken during the arguments because she had spent the 2 hours doing different math than Gorman, pulled up a blank document. "What do we say?" Calloway told her. The response that went out to Fleet Lord Suveth was 1 paragraph long. It did not begin with a salutation. It did not express hope for peace. It stated, in clear and simple language, that the Terran frontier zone, including all 14 systems within it and all space up to the boundary at Kepler's reach, was sovereign human territory. It stated that any Dominion vessel entering that space would be treated as a hostile incursion. It described, with a specificity that Nora Huang found almost clinical, the military response that would follow. The last sentence was, "This is not a negotiating position." Suveth received it 11 minutes after transmission. He read it in his command chamber aboard the flagship of the Vankara Advance Fleet, a ship so large that its crew of 40,000 was considered modest. He had governed fleets in the outer arms of the galaxy for 200 years. He had received surrender communiques, distress communiques, desperate please spare us communiques from species that had managed to project genuine poetic feeling into a final message before the end. He had never received anything like this. He read it again. He had the translation engine run it 3 separate times in case there was something being lost in the conversion. There was not. The humans had said what they meant in the plainest possible language, and what they meant was no. He called his second-in-command, a young Vankara officer named Veth who was considered brilliant by the standards of a species that had been winning wars for 6 centuries. They said no, Suveth told him. Veth looked at the translation on screen. He processed it for a moment. "Shall I begin fleet movement toward Kepler's reach?" "Yes," Suveth said. "They will correct their position when they see the fleet." This was not arrogance, exactly. It was pattern recognition. In 600 years, every species had corrected its position when it saw the fleet. Veth began preparing the order of movement. 212 warships. The kind of number that ended arguments without anyone firing a shot, historically. The kind of number that made mathematical men like Gorman write charts about it. Back in the Terran Command Center, Nora Huang was watching the Dominion fleet signatures begin to shift on the long-range display. They were slow, orderly movements. Not aggressive. Not frantic. The movements of something very large that did not feel the need to hurry because it had never needed to. "They're coming," she said. Calloway was still holding his coffee. He set it down. "How long?" "At current speed, 18 hours to Kepler's reach." He nodded. He pulled up the fleet deployment map and started making changes. Reinforcements redirected from 3 separate patrol routes, 40 ships in total. Not enough to match the Dominion on paper. Enough to be a statement. Gorman watched the deployment adjustments in silence for a moment. Then, Drew, 40 ships against 212 is not a war. It's a gesture. "Yes," Calloway said. "You're going to get people killed for a gesture." Calloway looked at the star map. At the line he had drawn. At the Ardent's position marker sitting alone at the edge of Kepler's reach, one small signal in a lot of empty space, holding where it was told to hold. "Gorman," he said, "there is a 24-year-old kid on that ship right now who doesn't have a way out either. And he's staying." Gorman had nothing to say to that. The deployment orders went through. 40 ships began moving toward Kepler's reach. They would arrive in 11 hours, 7 hours before the Dominion fleet reached the boundary. Calloway sent a short message to Graves. 2 sentences. The second sentence said she had full discretionary authority to act in defense of the boundary if contact was made before reinforcements arrived. Graves read it. Filed it. Did not respond, because there was nothing to say. On the Ardent, Owen Dale had finally stopped looking at the viewport and started checking his systems. Practical. Methodical. The way a person behaves when they have decided that being afraid takes up room they need for something else. Kara Novak tracked the Dominion fleet signatures across her screen and built a second overlay, and then a third, because building overlays was useful and also because her hands needed something to do while the 18 hours counted themselves down. The line at Kepler's reach was invisible. It was just a place where one thing ended and something else began. No marker. No physical object. Nothing that the universe had put there. Just a finger dragged across a map by a man with a chipped coffee mug and 30 years of watching people dig in, and the decision, made before the arguing was done, that this was the time to mean it. The Dominion came anyway. They always did, until they didn't. The Dominion fleet arrived 4 minutes ahead of schedule. That was the first thing Kara noticed. 212 warships, and they moved with a precision that made her stomach do something unpleasant. Each ship held its exact position. The formation was clean, symmetrical, the kind of shape that took centuries of coordination to make look effortless. They stopped just past the boundary line. Not on it. Past it. A careful 2,000 kilometers into Terran designated space, because the line was invisible and had no physical marker, and the Dominion either had not received exact coordinates or had decided that 2,000 kilometers was close enough to make the point without formally triggering the response Calloway had described. Owen saw it on his display first. He said, "They crossed it," and his voice stayed level, which cost him something. Graves looked at her display. Then she looked at the formation on the main screen. The Dominion flagship was at the center, a ship that dwarfed everything else the way a mountain dwarfs a house. Against it, the Ardent was the kind of vessel that did not belong in the same visual frame. "They're testing the coordinates," Kara said. "They don't know exactly where we drew it." "They know," Graves said. The Dominion reinforcements were still 11 minutes out. 11 minutes was a long time. Owen was aware of this in his body, the way you become aware of a bad step on stairs, that sudden wrong sensation, that knowledge that something has already been set in motion and can't be recalled. Suveth opened a channel. Kara translated in real time, her voice even, professional, eyes on her screen. What Suveth said was this: the humans had shown courage and he respected that. The Terran response had been reviewed and he understood its meaning. He was not asking them to surrender. He was asking them to be reasonable. Reasonable beings understood that some forces were simply larger than a single choice. The Dominion offered incorporation, not destruction. In 200 years, the new creatures of the Third Arm would have ships in the Dominion fleet, voices in the Dominion Council. It was not the worst future. It was, in fact, a generous one. He said all of this in the calm, deep register of a being who was 400 years old and had never been told no in a way that stuck. Graves let 6 seconds go by. In a conversation between military commands, 6 seconds is not a pause. It is a statement. Then she opened the return channel and spoke. Her voice was the same voice she used when she told someone what the weather was going to do. No performance in it. No anger. Just information being passed from one person to another. She told Suveth that she had heard him and she was not interested in his respect. She told him the line was a real thing and the Ardent was a real ship and she was a real officer with a real order, and that order was to hold this position, and she intended to hold it. She told him that if any Dominion vessel moved further into Terran space, she would open fire and deal with the diplomatic conversation afterward. Then she closed the channel. The room on the Ardent was very quiet. Owen was looking at the main display. The Dominion formation had not moved. 212 ships holding position with that terrible, perfect stillness. He thought about the people in the 14 frontier systems right now, going about their days, probably looking up at the sky, probably already knowing. Suveth did not respond. Not for 4 minutes. In those 4 minutes, Kara watched the Dominion fleet signatures the way you watch a door that might open. It did not open. What Suveth was doing, in those 4 minutes, was something he had not needed to do in a very long time. He was thinking. Not calculating, the calculations were simple, had always been simple, the math of force was not complicated. He was thinking about the voice on that return channel. The flat, plain, informational quality of it. The total absence of the thing he was used to hearing from species in this position, which was some combination of fear and hope, the particular music of a people who still believed that the right words might change the outcome. This woman did not believe that. She had already passed through believing it and come out the other side into something that was simpler and harder. He told Veth to hold the fleet where it was. They would wait. Humans were young. Young species were impulsive. She would either stand down or do something reckless, and either way the situation would resolve. The 11 minutes passed. 40 Terran ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Kepler's reach and took up formation behind the Ardent. Not in front of it. Behind it, because Graves was already there and the line was already there and the formation built around the fact that she had held the position rather than the fact that reinforcements had arrived. The Dominion sensors swept the new arrivals. Veth gave Savath the count. 40. He said it the way a person says a number they expected to be larger. Savath looked at the formation on his display. One ship in front, small, unimpressive by any standard his culture used to measure such things. 40 ships behind it. He thought about the odds in a simple, practiced way. They were still very good odds, from a Dominion perspective. 212 against 41. The outcome of that arithmetic was not in question. What was in question was something that arithmetic did not measure. A second Dominion ship moved. Not far. 300 kilometers closer to the Ardent's position. An adjustment. Another test. Slow enough to be deniable as maneuvering error. Owen saw it and said, "Commander." Graves was already looking at it. "That's a probe," she said. Not a question. It was not a probe, technically. It was a warship staffed by 4,000 crew members. But it was functioning as a probe. A question, wrapped in metal and mass. The question was, will you actually do it? Graves opened fire. One shot. Targeted, controlled, the minimum response possible for a vessel that size. The Dominion ship took damage to its forward array and pulled back immediately, hard, jets firing, the kind of fast movement that meant the crew inside were scared even if their commanders were not authorized to be. Graves opened the channel to Savath. "One," she said. Just that. One word. Account. She closed the channel. The Dominion fleet did not move. Not toward the line, not away from it. Savath sat in his command chamber and looked at his display for a very long time. Owen Dale let out a breath that he had been holding for approximately 11 minutes and 40 seconds. He did not say anything. He went back to his instruments and checked his systems with the methodical focus of someone who has decided that the next thing to do is the next thing to do. Kara was already running analysis on the Dominion formation, looking for shifts, watching the edges of the pattern. Her hands were steady. She had made them steady by giving them tasks. Outside the Ardent, the two fleets held their positions across a line that no one could see with their eyes, that had no physical existence, that was real anyway in the way that all decided things are real. The Dominion had been here before. Not here, exactly. But in this situation, this shape of confrontation. And it had always resolved the same way. This time, the variable that didn't fit their model was a woman with an overcast sky gaze and a count that had just started at 1. The Dominion did not move for 6 hours. They held their position past the line with the patience of something very old and very certain. 212 ships in perfect formation, engines at minimum burn, running no active scans, doing nothing that could be called aggressive. Just being there. The way a mountain is there. The way winter is there. Something that does not need to threaten because its size has always been threat enough. Savath let the hours pass on purpose. He had done this before. Not here, not with this species, but the shape of the tactic was familiar. You let the smaller force sit with its own fear. You let the silence work on them. Young species were not built for silence. They needed movement, action, resolution. The waiting was its own kind of pressure. He expected Graves to request a second communication window by hour 4. By hour 6, she had not requested anything. She was running maintenance checks on the Ardent systems. This was what Kara reported to Owen, who had asked without quite meaning to. Commander Graves was in the secondary bay reviewing the propulsion calibrations that had been flagged 2 weeks ago and had not yet been addressed. She had asked Ensign Lou Marsh to bring her coffee. She was, as far as anyone could tell, using the 6 hours to do paperwork. Owen processed this information for a moment. She's doing maintenance. Propulsion calibrations, Kara confirmed. He thought about this. Then he went back to his own station and started reviewing the sensor logs from the past 48 hours, because if Graves was doing maintenance during a standoff with the most powerful military force in the known galaxy, then he could review sensor logs. In the Dominion flagship, Veth brought Savath a report that the analysts had been compiling since the Terran response first arrived. He set it on the command table and waited. Savath read it slowly. The report was about humans. Not about the Terran military, specifically, though that was in there. It was about humans as a subject, built from 40 years of data collection since the species had first emerged into deep space with their noisy, improvised ships and their complete lack of awareness that they were supposed to wait to be noticed. The raw data was not alarming. Humanity's fleet was small. Their technology was advanced in some areas and oddly basic in others, as though they had sprinted in specific directions without stopping to look sideways. Their population was concentrated, which was a strategic vulnerability. Their supply lines, at the frontier zone, were long. None of that was the part of the report that made Suveth set it down carefully on the table. The part that made him set it down was the combat performance section. 3 conflicts in 40 years of space travel. One with the Reth border clans, one with a species called the Morkai who had territory adjacent to the early Terran colonies, and one internal to humanity's own political structure, brief and brutal, ended within 14 months. In all 3 cases, the analysts noted the same pattern. Human forces performed measurably better under conditions of direct personal threat than under any other conditions. Fear did not degrade their function. It appeared, in the data, to sharpen it. There was a note at the bottom of the combat section, written by an analyst named Vareth who was considered the most careful thinker in Dominion strategic intelligence. It said, "It is possible that this species is not fighting to expand. It is fighting to protect something. The distinction is significant. Species that fight for territory will retreat when the cost becomes too high. Species that fight for home will not. We have very limited data on how to model the second category." Suveth read that note 3 times. He looked at his display. The Ardent was still there. Small. Unchanged. It had been there for 16 hours now, across the line, in between his fleet and 40 ships that were not, by any reasonable measure, enough to stop 212. He thought about what the woman had said on the channel. The total lack of performance in it. No brave last stand energy. No desperation. Just a person stating a fact about what was going to happen. He thought about the word one. Just one word, after she fired. No threat attached to it. She had not said, "That is what will happen to the next vessel." She had not needed to. The count was the threat. It was worse than a speech. A speech gave you something to argue with. He told Veth to prepare an unmanned probe. Small. The kind used for boundary survey work. He wanted to send it across the line quietly and see how fast the Terran commander responded and what response she chose. Veth prepared it. Suveth authorized the launch. The probe crossed the line. Graves fired in 4 seconds. It was not the speed that Suveth found most interesting. It was the fact that she had clearly been watching for it. She had been doing maintenance checks and reviewing propulsion calibrations, and she had still been watching, with some part of her attention, for exactly this. She had not needed to deliberate. The decision had already been made, and when the moment came, all she did was execute it. For seconds from crossing to destruction. He opened the channel. He did not speak. He waited. Graves opened the return channel. 2, she said. Then she closed it. In the Terran Command Center on Earth, Calloway received the report about the probe 12 minutes after it happened, because that was how long it took to travel at the speed of communication across the distance. He read the report. He read the part about 4 seconds. He read the part about what Graves had said. He did something that surprised the 2 junior officers who were in the room with him. He smiled. Not the big, relieved smile of a man who had gotten good news. It was a smaller thing. A private thing. The smile of a man who had gambled on a specific kind of person and been proven right, which was different from being proven lucky. Admiral Gorman was not in the room, which was good, because Calloway did not have the patience for another chart just then. Nora Huang was there. She watched Calloway's face and then looked at the report and then looked at the Dominion fleet signatures on the long-range display, which had not moved in 6 hours. "They're running models," she said. "Yes," Calloway said. "What do you think they're finding?" He picked up his chipped coffee mug and looked into it for a moment. "That we don't improve our odds by waiting. And neither do they." He set the mug down. They expected her to stand down after the probe. She didn't. No. She counted. Nora thought about that. About what the count meant. Not a threat. Not anger. Just a record being kept, openly, so that the other side knew a record was being kept. 2. And then what came after 2, and after that? They'll request a formal channel, she said. Soon, Calloway agreed. Nora looked at the fleet signatures again. She scared them. Calloway looked at the display. At the one small marker that was the Ardent, sitting across the invisible line from 212 ships, doing its maintenance checks, keeping its count. She didn't scare them, he said. She confused them. And for them, that's worse. Kara Novak was eating a protein bar at her console when the formal request for a communication window came in from the Dominion flagship. It was phrased in diplomatic language, careful and correct, requesting a channel between equal parties for the purpose of discussion. She stared at the phrase, equal parties, for a second. Then she went and got Graves. Graves came back to the bridge with a propulsion calibration report still in one hand. She set it on the console and looked at the request on Kara's screen. Her expression did not change. Tell them yes, she said. 1 hour. She picked up the calibration report and went back to the secondary bay. The count was still at 2. The hour had not started yet, the station had been built in 3 days. That was the detail that made Veth go quiet when he stepped off the Dominion shuttle and looked around. He was the advance officer, sent ahead of Suveth to check the meeting space, and he had expected something temporary, a prefabricated module, quick-welded panels, the kind of structure that announced its own urgency. What he found instead was a working station with clean corridors, functioning environmental systems, sealed airlocks that opened and closed with quiet precision, and a meeting room with a proper table and decent lighting. 3 days. He walked back to the shuttle and told his escort that the humans had built a permanent-grade installation in 3 days, and he was choosing to mention that without editorializing, and the escort looked at the station's exterior through the viewport and said nothing at all. Calloway arrived from Earth. He brought Nora Huang and 2 aides and a thermos of coffee, because the station's coffee supply had not yet been tested and he had been in enough unfamiliar places to know that coffee was worth carrying. Suveth arrived from the flagship. He was taller than Calloway had expected, and older looking, in the way of his species, a dryness to the skin, a heaviness around the eyes that was not fatigue but something more like accumulated experience pressing outward. He moved with the precise economy of a being who had not wasted a gesture in centuries. They met in the middle of the corridor, equidistant from each of their shuttles. This was Kara's doing, technically, she had calculated it, because she was thorough that way. Calloway offered his hand. He had read enough about the Venkara to know that the handshake was not their custom, but he offered it anyway, not as a test, not as a performance, just as the most natural thing his body knew how to do when meeting someone. Suveth looked at the offered hand for a moment, then took it briefly and released it. They walked to the meeting room. Calloway poured coffee for himself and offered the thermos to the room in general, which Nora accepted and the 2 Venkara aides did not. He settled into his chair the way he settled into most things, without ceremony, without adjustment, like the chair had been made for him specifically and always had been. Suveth sat across from him and looked at this man who had drawn a line with his finger on a map and sent a single paragraph to the most powerful fleet in the galaxy. What he had expected, walking into this room, was posturing. Tall speeches. The kind of performance that young species gave when they had gotten lucky and needed to feel as though it had been skill. He had seen it many times, from many species, before the end came for them. Calloway did not posture. He looked at Suveth the way a person looks at someone they are genuinely interested in understanding, without the interest being flattery. He said, "I'd like to be straightforward with you, if that works." Suveth said that it worked. Calloway said, "We don't want your territory. We don't want a war. We want to be left alone long enough to become whatever it is we're going to become, and we don't know yet what that is, and that's not a position, it's just the truth." Suveth was quiet for a moment. What you did at Kepler's Reach was not the behavior of a species that wants to be left alone. Yes it was, Calloway said. We fought at Kepler's Reach because that was the only way to be left alone. If we had moved, you would have kept coming. Not out of malice. Just because nothing stopped you. He picked up his coffee mug. Something needed to stop you. Suveth considered this. 1 ship. Against 212. She held it. She did. Savath paused. I have been in this work for 200 years. I have not encountered that before. Calloway nodded. She's from Ohio, he said, which Savath did not understand, and which Calloway did not explain, because some things were not for explaining. What followed over the next 3 hours was not a standard negotiation. Standard negotiations involved an exchange of positions, a gradual movement toward center, a compromise that each side could characterize as a win. This was not that. Calloway was not interested in the middle. He was interested in a clear line, which already existed, and he was interested in the Dominion acknowledging it in formal language that both sides could record. Savath was not accustomed to this structure. The Dominion's negotiations were usually about the terms of incorporation. What was on the table was never the question of incorporation itself. That was settled by the time talks began. He found, after an hour and a half, that he had no tool for a conversation where incorporation was simply not available as an option. The framework he had used for 200 years did not apply. He kept reaching for it and finding empty air. Calloway watched this happen without pressing it. He drank his coffee. He answered Savath's questions with plain answers. He asked his own questions and listened to the answers. He was, Savath realized, the most patient man he had met in a very long time. There was a moment in the second hour when Savath asked directly, "If we had sent 500 ships, would your officer have stood?" Calloway thought about it honestly. "I believe she would have," he said. "I think the number stopped mattering to her before it started." "Why?" Calloway looked at his mug. "Because when the number gets large enough, the math stops being about winning and starts being about what you're willing to lose to hold the thing you're holding. And that math is different for different people." He looked up. She already knew her answer to that math. That's why the size of the fleet didn't change anything for her. Savath was quiet. He was thinking about the word one. About the count that had started at 2 and had not needed to go further. About an officer doing maintenance calibrations during a standoff that should have terrified her into stillness. She wasn't afraid, he said. She was afraid, Calloway said. She stayed anyway. That's a different thing. The agreement was recorded in both languages. The line at Kepler's Reach became a formal boundary, documented not as a concession by the Dominion and not as a treaty of the kind the Dominion usually dictated, but as a mutual acknowledgement. The language Nora Huang drafted was careful and specific. It said, in effect, this is where one thing ends and another begins, and both sides have recorded that they know it. Savath signed it. Calloway signed it. The signing took less time than the coffee. They walked back to their shuttles. Calloway offered his hand again at the corridor junction, equidistant from each shuttle, the same spot where they had met 3 hours ago. Savath took it. He held it a moment longer this time. Then they went their separate ways. Back on the Ardent, Kara was eating a sandwich at her station when the formal confirmation came through that the agreement had been signed. She read it twice to be sure. Then she set it down and picked her sandwich back up. Owen came in with 2 cups of coffee and sat in the seat next to her, which was technically not his station, but no one said anything. He looked at the Dominion fleet signatures on the display. They were moving. Slow, ordered withdrawals, one ship at a time, the way a tide goes out, not defeated, not fleeing, just going. "Do you think they'll come back?" he asked. Kara chewed. Thought about the probe and the 4 seconds and the count and Graves' voice on that channel, flat as a road, certain as a lock clicking home. "Eventually," she said. "But not for a long time." Owen nodded. He drank his coffee. Outside the Ardent's viewport, the Dominion ships pulled back across the line. Ship by ship. The formation stayed clean. It was still impressive, even retreating. It crossed the line going the other way and kept going. The line held. It had always been invisible. Just a decision made by a man with a chipped mug and a woman who did maintenance calibrations during standoffs and a kid who stayed at his console even when the math was terrible. Just a thing that people had agreed was real. It was real. That was enough.